Hello, everyone. My name is Jim Oberlander, and I'm here to present on my portion of the assignment entitled Instrument Format for Evaluation of Student Learning. My content that's going to be discussed here is implementing a systematic test development process. Throughout this presentation, I'm going to be discussing aspects of that implementation process, such as thoughtful development, test blueprinting, student preparation for the exam process, as well as I developed for my own self-reflection pertaining to this assignment. I developed a test blueprint for one of my courses that I'm going to be sharing with you, as well as offering a few additional resources that may be of interest to you. So the first step in this process is that it's properly planned. Carpenters when they build something, they often say measure twice, cut once, meaning that they diligently determine what they're going to do before they take action. And in the process of building assessments should be entered into with that same mindset. Within that proper planning, individuals, educators need to consider the people, the purpose, and the program-minded aspects of the planning. So the people is the audience, the student cohort. Is this a freshman, a sophomore, junior, senior class? Is it undergrad? Is it graduate? Is it an LPN? Is it an RN? Is it a BN, SEN level course? Even the content, which we'll talk a little bit more later, but where are these students in their development? The purpose, is it a formative assessment, meaning to primarily provide feedback for building and developing and improving that a student can take from that assessment? Or is it a summative purpose, that it's an end of unit or end of semester exam where students are the intention of the educator is to have students present what they know? All the way from pre-tests, course exams, comprehensive finals, really thinking about that purpose. Thirdly is being program-minded. Education does not occur within siloed courses. We often get lost in that silo of this is my class, I'm going to do what I need to do, what's best for the students in this class. But in order to really provide a quality systematic test development process, educators need to be thinking outside of their own classroom. So scheduling at appropriate times during a semester, working in collaboration with other course faculty in order to provide an adequate, fair, reasonable time frame for the assessment, so that students aren't getting hit with 4 or 5 assessments in 1 week and then they have nothing the next. That's going to result in maybe less reliability on those examinations. The next step in this process is being systematically structured. The systematic structure is the ability for an exam to assess and progress a student based on its structure. So the 3 elements that I consider important to this component is substance, strength, and scheme. Substance is the content of the exam. What is being tested? How is it evaluating the course objectives, the unit objectives? The strength of the exam involves the blueprinting and the weighting of the content and the course objectives on that exam. And we're going to talk more about that blueprinting process, but that strength, the weighting, how much of the student's grade is being evaluated by this assessment, and making sure that those weightings are adequate, they're appropriate, they're not skewed towards only a couple pieces of information, but the students really have an opportunity to share what they know across the breadth of information that was taught to them and that they've had a chance to learn. And the scheme is the length. How long is this exam going to be? Is it going to be a 15-question, formative quiz, or is it going to be a 100-question comprehensive final? Even the assessment format fits into the scheme of multiple choice, select all that applied, true and false, matching, ordering, short answer essay, performance versus psychomotor. What is the structure? What is the substance, the strength, and the scheme of this exam? The third component of implementing a systematic test development process is creating exams that are decently difficult. And I use that word very specifically because we can make very easy exams, but those don't really challenge students and they don't provide valid results. And then we can make exceptionally difficult exams that really are on the verge of being unfair because we're maybe expecting too much out of our students' abilities to learn and process and perform on an exam. So being decently difficult is very important to the validity of an examination. And the three components of this item in the process is destination, discrimination, and distribution. Destination really is looking at the angle, the direction towards mastery. To what extent do we want or are we aiming for students to perform at? Is this a criterion referenced exam or a norm referenced exam? And the criterion referenced exam are really the exams that should be provided to students in the classroom because they're aimed and based on meeting certain objectives and certain unit objectives, certain course objectives of a particular component in the program. Whereas a norm referenced exam is a standardized exam like the NCLEX or the SAT, the ACT. Teachers sometimes try to create norm referenced exams, and those really are looking at bell curve distributions and discriminations and the process, but those are huge numbers of students and they're large test pools in the process of trying to evaluate average. Well, that's not the purpose of a course. The purpose of a course is to provide information, help students learn the information, and have the students present that information back, i.e. a criterion referenced exam, which means the bell curve is probably not the best desired outcome for a faculty to say, yes, I created a good exam. Because if the bell curve splits passing and failing at like a 75% or an 80%, and that's where your bell curve is at, then half the class failed and half the class passed. And that's probably needing to be evaluated because you would be hopeful in having students swing towards the passing side, the higher end of the curve. You would skew the curve in that direction. The second part of this is discrimination. Discrimination is as important as the difficulty level, and that is the ability to decipher the high from the low achievers. So if a question has a discrimination of less than 30%, then it's probably too hard that only 30% are getting it correct, and it's not going to be able to discriminate well your high and low achievers. As well as if more than 90% of students are getting it right, then it's probably too easy, and it also isn't going to provide the ability to discriminate the high from the low achievers. So it isn't just make an easier question, make a harder question, but it's find a good discrimination level, adapt the questions to improve the ability to discriminate. But that also doesn't mean that, if you go back to the purpose of the question, if it's a definition or a lab value or something point blank objective, it would be hopeful that the majority of the class would get that right. So it doesn't mean throw out questions that always throw out questions that are less than 30% or more than 90% correct. It just means you want to make sure you're evaluating those questions. Are they meeting the intention of the assessment in that question? The third component is distribution. The mean versus the median. And again, this gets into the bell curve conversation as well. Is it appropriate for the classroom to have a standardized test as a part of the course? or develop a test for the course that is standardized? And the answer to that wouldn't be yes always or no always. Faculty, educators, course developers, exam developers really need to evaluate the intention of the assessment. What is the destination? What is the purpose? What is the outcome that is where as faculty are being desired to draw, we're desiring to draw from this evaluation measure, or that we're providing to students? What's the outcome, the destination we're wanting to provide to the students? And so we really need to be careful about evaluating the distribution of the examination. What's an acceptable pass rate? The interesting thing that I found that McDonald shared, and I agree with, and I've had a number of conversations with other faculty about, have to do with that pass rate. And I see a lot of faculty or a lot of programs in my travels and in conversations at conferences where there's this desire to simply increase the pass rate percentage. So we move from 75% to a 78%, and that's now our passing number, our passing grade for a course. But nothing changed in the course. So we're merely trying to draw into some of the higher achievers, but we're not really evaluating our assessments when we do that very well. What McDonald recommends is leave your pass rate where it's at and just make more difficult exams, appropriately, decently difficult exams, in order to get the outcomes that we're looking for. Because evaluating, improving the assessments, making them more difficult, maybe higher level Bloom's taxonomy, is going to prepare them and grow them in their development towards practice and towards the NCLEX, whereas just changing the pass rate doesn't really improve the learning of for the student, and it doesn't really improve the validity or of the exam either. The fourth main component of implementing a proper test development plan is being relevantly readying. A student should not feel tricked, duped, or inappropriately challenged. They should feel readied by the faculty. The faculty should be encouraging certain study behaviors and encouraging students to, study early, study often, and also providing them, faculty should provide the students with the necessary readying material. So the three components that fit under this are relaying, reviewing, and rehearsing. Relaying involves the provision of a basic blueprint to the students. And it's something that honestly I never really thought that much about. I thought it was giving the students too much information. It was angling them towards certain content, but really, if the blueprint is designed well and equally, equitably weighted to the units and to the information, then providing a blueprint is not overly providing students a study guide. It's not prescriptive to the questions. It's just giving students an idea of how much certain components are going to be weighted over the course of the unit, over the course of the course, the entire course. And that's really important to relay that information to students. I'm learning, and I'm going to desire to implement some of these strategies in the very near future. Reviewing, the second aspect is reviewing. Maybe a pre-exam review, a tutoring session. There's a lot of concern often about, well, maybe you're teaching to the test because the faculty knows what's on the test, and therefore when they do these tutoring sessions, they might provide too much information specific to questions. I agree with that, but I also, unless the faculty is looking at the question as they're tutoring, that obviously might skew things towards teaching to the test. But from my own experience, when I do tutoring sessions, I allow the students to run those tutoring sessions. So I tell them, I'm not bringing any new information to this. You bring your questions. I will review whatever it is you would like to review. And then during that review session, sometimes I'll be like, that's not really a priority aspect of this information. Let's talk about this instead, in terms of guiding students to help them understand and help them prioritize the more important components to nursing practice, to implementation, and to even testing. And then even the aspect that I believe fits into this as well is a post-exam review. We have to give students an opportunity to learn from their mistakes, not just present information and then move on. We have to be able to give them opportunities to review and learn from their mistakes, to solidify their learning from their mistakes. That also helps reinforce our whole concept of lifelong learning. If in education we merely tell the students to learn the stuff, test them, and then move on, we're not providing an arena that models lifelong learning. We're providing a eat and spit out arena. We don't want that. We want lifelong learning. The third aspect is the rehearsing, quizzing. Pop quizzes, I agree with McDonald, no. We're tricking them, we're duping them, we're inappropriately challenging them, we're expecting too much from them when we penalize them by doing pop quizzes. And I've for a long time not agreed with pop quizzes because it does come across as a disciplinary type behavior. What we want to do is relevantly ready our students for the exams. All right, so now I want to provide a blueprinting that I've created as an example from my own learning from this process. And this was a phenomenal experience, and I'm going to share a little bit about the process, how I came about this as well. But right now, I just want to share the test blueprinting process with you. So the first thing I did was I took my course, legit course that I'm teaching right now, number of exams, the number of questions that I desire, which right now I have about 320 questions across the semester. The number of items on each exam is roughly about 80. Some of the unit exams are a little bit less, the finals a little bit more. And then a total lecture hours. Now, I have a 3 credit hour course across about 15 weeks. And so there's exams take away from that time. Some review sessions take away from that time, which some people look at that as lecture. I don't really look at that as lecture time because it's student driven more so in the terms of we've already covered our content, we've already done some learning, and now we have extra components. And then again, there's a few hours throughout the semester where, visitors will come in, students will share experiences. So I'm trying to pull that out and really get a good number of how many hours am I interacting with students in a learning environment pertinent to the content. So it's not just me lecturing, I don't do that either, but it's engaged in a learning environment specific to the content. And for me, that's roughly about 33 hours during the semester. There's 7 course objectives. I broke down first the percentage, roughly, again, this is an estimate, but roughly how much weighting needs to be given to each of those components. And then the number of questions in the third column there is the number of questions throughout the course of the entire semester that need to be dedicated to that course objective, showing that that course objective has been met. This slide is beginning to get a little more specific about the content, the units that are taught. So being a patho-pharm class, I involve body systems with the medications for the diseases that occur to those body systems. It's a heavy class. There's a patho-pharm 1 and a patho-pharm 2. We split up the body systems so we can teach the patho-pharm together. So my course covers acid-base balance, fluid electrolytes, blood, urine, endocrine, cardiovascular, respiratory, and digestive. Now, this course was sort of given to me. I sort of have evaluated it, developed it throughout the course of the last couple of years. But one thing that has never been implemented, communicated as an expectation is test blueprinting. Faculty in our university just either are expected to do it, but there isn't a standard of doing it. And I don't see many faculty doing it. I don't hear about many faculty doing an objective test blueprint for their courses. And this was a phenomenal experience for me in the course of the last week. So I broke down the lecture hours, the percent of lecture hours for each of those units, and then the number of semester items based on those percentages. Unfortunately, when I went through and evaluated what I'm doing compared to what this test blueprint would have me do, I have some pretty significant changes that I need to do. And I think I know it's really going to strengthen the validity of my assessments. And it gives me evidence, it gives me reference points for faculty, for other faculty, for my administrators, and for students to say, here's the validity, here's the outcomes, here's the exam, here's why the questions are there, here's the components that they evaluate. This is why it's a good test. This is why it's a good test plan. And then this grid talks about each of those units, again, 1 through 7, the percentage of total hours again, which is the same from the previous slide. You see it just transferred over here. Then it's the percentage of exam lecture hours. So for broken down by examinations, units 1, 2, and 3 are on one exam, units 4 on one exam, unit 5 on one exam, and unit 6 and 7 together on one exam. And so you can see the number of semester items across the spectrum. That's the goal. And then broken down by each of the exams and how each of the exams cover those number of semester items. And so you can see that going across the first 3 rows for exam 1, that exam 1 is obviously units 1, 2, and 3. But then when you get to exam 2, that's semi-comprehensive. There isn't a whole lot of components, exam questions from previous content, but there's a few. And then for exam 3, same deal. The majority of the content comes from the current unit with a few comprehensive questions. And then the final, again, primarily the final units with a few comprehensive questions thrown in there as well to equal the 320 assessment items during the course exams. This grid talks about how the objectives were met. So again, going back a few slides, showed the percentage of each of those objectives and the range of questions for each of those objectives during the semester. And so creating objectives 1 through 7, putting in the range of questions, and then how each of the exams were going to meet those objectives. This was probably the most difficult, even thinking about how I'm going to reevaluate my questions. And I know I'm going to be throwing out, getting rid of a number of questions. I'm going to have to remake a number of questions, redesign or tweak some questions that are currently there in order to not only meet the objectives, but also meet the unit expectations. But it's very exciting to me because I'm all about wanting a valid and reliable, reliability, but I'm all about having a valid assessment. And when you come down and have conversations with students and administrators and other faculty, how do you know it was a good test? Here it is. Here's a good test. And it really creates a solid, evidence-based foundation for discussion instead of saying, I think it's a good one. I've been doing that test for a long time and I've had really good results with it. I've got a nice bell curve. Again, all these things we've talked about that maybe aren't as accurate or aren't as true or aren't needing to be followed the way that we once thought they should be. And then this again, this was finishing up the objective conversation. So there was 2 slides. This one's covering exam 1, 2, and 3, and you can see how each of the units, like exam 1 is just units 1 through 3. Exam 2 is units 1 through 3, a couple questions, and then units 4, the primary, and then exam 3, unit 5 is the primary, units 1 through 4 are secondary, a few questions in there. And then on this last slide here for the test blueprint, 1 through 5 are just a few questions from each. And then unit 6 and 7 are the primary crux of that assessment and how they met the objectives. And again, meeting the 320 over the entire course of the semester. Some worthy websites. So this first website that I would encourage you to go check out is from a medical perspective, medical examination preparation, and it has some blueprinting examples within it. It's a great resource. It's a PDF document. The next website I would guide you to also is another example of blueprinting and the blueprinting process, but this one involves or provides 9 rationale for the importance of blueprinting your examinations in nursing programs. Everything from assisting students to know what they need to study, preparing for standardized examinations, not that you're making standardized, but you're preparing them for standardized exams, to reviewing a variety of question formats and weightings, to evaluating for fairness and validity. All of those rationale and more are within that website. The article here, this first article I'm suggesting, discusses blueprinting in a 4-step process. So identifying major knowledge or skill domain, what kind of test are you going to be providing, determining the objectives, deciding the format, and then specifying the weightings. So in a 4-step process, similar to what McDonald discusses, but almost in a step-by-step process. And there's some examples within that article, again, very similar to McDonald's description. This next article that I'm suggesting involves the use of Bloom's taxonomy to evaluate cognitive categories. So McDonald talks about criterion referenced versus NCLEX categories versus Bloom's taxonomy versus some different ways that we can evaluate or create a test blueprint from. And I wanted to provide a different perspective here using Bloom's taxonomy, which I think by itself would be weak, but in addition to looking at objectives and looking at the unit weightings, there needs to be some discussion on progressing students' critical thinking, progressing their Bloom's taxonomy cognitive level of development. And if we're only giving understanding or remembering questions, then we're not preparing them for practice. We're not preparing them for the evaluation and the creation and the synthesis processes of learning. And we're not evaluating those. So it's really, I think Bloom's taxonomy could also be implemented into a test development process. And then this last website that, and it's not even a website, I'm just providing some information that if you Google test bank nursing free, you will find that most of the test banks provided by publishers are on the internet, and they're very cheap, and students know. And so what I want to talk about is keeping that in mind as we're going through a test development process. I had some very meaningful meditation on this whole assignment. My personal evaluation, my self-evaluation, truthfully, I've never been taught how to do a test blueprint. Um, though I've been told it's valuable, I've never been taught. I've never been encouraged, or it's never been an assignment, or it's never been an expectation that my administration has provided or asked from faculty. Um, and I believe that I've failed my past students because I've not conducted test blueprinting. I really believe, I mean, I think I'm a decent educator. I'm growing and I'm learning, and lifelong learning. It's all very important. And I have great rapport with my students. They don't hate my exams. They call them really difficult, but yet they're learning, and they're recognizing that they need to step up their game a little bit. And so I consider that oh, I had a good test. But I don't really have evidence behind, was it a valid assessment? So I'm really excited about moving forward with this test blueprinting process, which is why I took the time for this assignment to actually create the test blueprint that I'm going to implement in my course. I felt that my exams were strong again, when in fact honestly, my exams probably were not properly weighted. I know they weren't properly weighted to the objectives. They weren't properly weighted to the units. They weren't properly weighted to the overall course plan. I just was going based on feelings. This looks like a good question. That looks like a good question. Ooh, I talked about that in class. I want to see if the students know that. But to get a big picture, I've never had that big picture in my course exam process. So I'm really excited to move forward with this test blueprinting. Discussion with other faculty. I've had discussions recently and in the past with other faculty, and they don't conduct test blueprinting either. They go through and they sort of cognitively think, okay, I've already asked a few questions on that. I've already asked a few questions on that. Sprinkle in a little bit of this, sprinkle in a little bit of that, and it's good to go. The rest is up to the students. And I'm learning right now that is a false belief. It really is our job to design the most valid assessment that we can possible, and test blueprinting is definitely a part of that. So moving forward, again, I plan to do this in all my courses. I plan to talk about it with my administrators. I plan to talk about it with my other faculty. Hey, are you doing test blueprinting? What does your test blueprinting process look like? Is there a reason that you are? Is there a reason that you aren't? Let me tell you about my experience with test blueprinting. And I have a feeling I'm going to love it. Yes, it's a little bit of extra work on the front end, but it's going to alleviate the headaches and the conversations. You know, it gives me weight behind the students that are failing and the weight behind the students that are passing, because no, I created a valid test. Here's the validity. Here's the results. Here's the discrimination. Here's the distribution. You know, here's the destination. Here's the purpose. We met the purpose. We met all the objectives. It was a valid assessment. I can say that now, but it's an empty comment. I'm looking forward to the time when that's no longer an empty comment. So in the words of McDonald, evidence of validity is a matter of fairness and is closely linked to careful planning. I hope that you've enjoyed this presentation. I hope you've learned and been encouraged by this presentation about the systematic test development process, the importance of purposely planning and creating decently difficult exams that are systematically structured and that also relevantly ready our students for success. I wish you all well and have a great day. Let me know if you have any questions.